All right, welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're diving deep. We're going to uncover a kind of hidden language, one that governs pretty much everything we do, from our simplest choices to the most complex social dramas you can imagine. You know, whether you realize it or not, your life is just full of these little bargains. We're constantly creating rules for ourselves and for other people. Think about it. If you finish your homework, then you can have some tablet time. It's just a fundamental way we structure our world. And it's not just rules we set on purpose. We all learn to read the signs, signals that tell us what to do. Like a dark house on Halloween, that sends a really clear signal, right? If I knock on this door, then I'm probably not getting any candy. So we just learn to skip it. So these simple conditional relationships, these if-then rules, well, they're what psychologists call behavioral contingencies. And they are, absolutely everywhere. They're baked into our laws, they're the rules of baseball, they're in the promises and even the threats we make. They're like the invisible architecture of our entire social reality. Okay, but here's where it gets really fascinating. Our brains are basically pattern-finding machines. But what happens when we get the rules wrong? What happens when we see a pattern that isn't really there? Let's kick things off with a classic experiment that shows just how easily our minds can invent rules out of thin air. Okay, so let's dive into this. It all starts with figuring out the difference between a real connection and just a coincidence. And to do that, we're going to look at the honestly kind of surprising work of B.F. Skinner and his superstitious pigeons. So imagine you're a pigeon in one of these experiments. Food shows up, but totally at random. Now, let's say right before a food pellet drops, you just happen to flap your left wing. Your pigeon brain immediately makes a connection. Whoa, if I flap my wing, then I get food. So what do? You start flapping that wing like there's no tomorrow. Skinner called this superstitious behavior, and it really highlights a critical point. For real learning to happen, you need a reliable if-then link, not just some random accidental pairing. And here's what's so wild about this idea of a behavioral contingency. It exists whether or not anyone ever acts on it. Think about it. The rule, if you drop a glass on a hard floor, then it will break, is always true. It's true even if you never, ever drop a glass. The rule is the relationship itself, just waiting out there in the world. All right, so if these powerful but invisible rules are running everything, and we want to understand them and maybe even change them, then we've got to find a way to make them visible. We need a language, a system to write them down and map them out. And here it is. This simple diagram developed by the brilliant Francis Mechner is the foundation for everything that follows. Look how elegant it is. A is for the act, C is for the consequence, and that arrow, that's the if-then relationship. This right here is our basic sentence, our core building block. Okay, so from that simple base, we can start adding layers to make this language way more descriptive. First, we can add a little letter to show who's doing the action. We'll just call them Agent A. Then we can pop in a plus or a minus sign to show if the consequence is good or bad for them. And finally, we can add this really cool prevention arrow that shows how one action can actually block another one from happening. And just like that, with only a few elements, this language starts to get really powerful. So on the left, you see our basic if A, then C. Simple enough. But look at the right. Using that vertical arrow we just talked about, we can now show an action that prevents a consequence. We're starting to map out a kind of logic that's honestly really hard to describe precisely with just words. But, okay, these diagrams are still missing the single most crucial element of all, the minds of the people involved, right? The very same event can mean completely different things depending on who knows what and when they know it. And Mechner's system says these two concepts are the absolute key. First, there's perceiving. That's what you see happening right now, in the moment. Then there's predicting. That's what you expect to happen based on your past experiences or signals you've seen. Separating these two is, well, it's everything. Because that gap between what we predict and what we perceive, that's where all the interesting stuff, all the drama, happens. And this is literally how we can map what's going on in someone's head. So look at the diagram on the left. See the little A above the C? That tells us that our agent A predicted this consequence would happen. The A below the C tells us they also perceived it happening. No surprises there, everything went as planned. But now look at the one on the right. The A below is still there. They saw what happened, But see that crossed out A up top? That means they did not see it coming. This is the symbol for surprise. And it gets even more nuanced than that. We can add different modifiers to show that someone saw something but totally misunderstood it, or that they were expecting something completely different. This is what lets us map out things like mistakes, deception, and simple misunderstandings with pinpoint precision. Okay, so enough with the theory. Let's really put this language to the test. This isn't just for pigeons in a lab. We can use this very same framework to map the hidden dynamics of a really complex human situation. So think about this for a second. What's the real difference between just taking something and stealing it? The physical action is identical, right? One person ends up with an object that the other person used to have. So what's the difference? Well, the answer isn't in the action itself. It's all about what each person knows and perceives. Okay, let's walk through this diagram of a theft together, nice and slow. Inside those big brackets, that's the starting point, C1. There's a cookie, and it's up for grabs. Person A could take it, that's action A3. And person B could also take it, that's action A4. Now, let's follow the arrows. We see that person B is the one who actually does take the cookie. That's action A4, and it leads to the outcome C2. And see that vertical line? That shows that B's action has now prevented A from getting that cookie. But here is the absolute key. This is what makes it theft. Look really close at those little letters around the outcome, C2. That little tilde on top, that means person B predicted this would happen. They knew exactly what they were doing. Now look down below. See that A with the tilde underneath it? That means person A does not perceive the outcome. They have no idea the cookie is gone. That is the crime. It's not the taking of the cookie, it's the engineered ignorance. One person knows everything, and the other is left completely in the dark. And believe it or not, this notation is so powerful it can map out one of the most legendary deceptions in all of history. So here, let's say A represents the Greeks and B represents the Trojans. The diagram shows the Greeks offering the horse, and this is the whole key. It shows they predicted the Trojans would misperceive it as a genuine gift. Then it maps out the fatal surprise, an outcome the Trojans totally failed to predict. The entire strategy, the deception, the misperception, the surprise, it's all captured right there in these simple symbols. So why does any of this really matter? Why should you care? Because this is way more than just a tool for analyzing things that have already happened. The real power here is that once you can see the rules, you gain the power to rewrite them. This is a blueprint for designing the future. And really, this is the ultimate takeaway. You know, things like our genetics, our personal history, those are pretty tough to change. But as Mechner points out, the if-then rules that structure how we interact with each other, those are different. The rules in our families, in our workplaces, even in our own personal habits, they are not set in stone. They can be modified, they can be designed. So by making these hidden rules visible, we get the power to consciously change them. We can actually analyze the flow of information. We can see where the misunderstandings are happening. And we can restructure those if-then relationships to create better, more effective, and honestly, fairer outcomes for everyone. Look, this is more than just a neat theory. It's a whole new way of seeing the world. Once you start looking for the if-then rules that are shaping your day, your relationships, your work, you're going to start seeing opportunities for improvement absolutely everywhere. So, the real question is, what hidden rule in your life are you going to redesign first?